Thanks, David.
Thank you so much, David, for having me, and also Mary Spirito, of course. Hi. I'm so glad to be here, and I want to thank all of you for coming as well, because as much as some critics might not think so, I think that being here at Art Basel and being here in this conversation and being part of a dialogue is really the most radical thing that we can do in the, if you'll forgive my editorializing, unfortunate political situation that we found ourselves in. We're all here because we believe in beauty and we believe in making the world a more equitable place, and I think that that's truly admirable. So thanks everyone for coming. We're going to start by having some presentations by our three artist members, and then I'm going to throw out a few general questions for us to discuss, and then I'd like to open it up for all of us to have a dialogue, and I believe we'll be starting with Molly.
Yeah, I get that special privilege. So yeah, sorry, I'm slightly nervous, so I'm just going to be... Anyway, we are going to try and do like really speedy intros to our work to smooth the way into the conversation because we don't have so long. But yeah, so I've got this is quite an old work, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about the somewhat convoluted path that I've taken to where I am now, in that I started out making quite... narrative, documentary-style art film that would try and kind of unearth layers of reality that were like slightly beneath or behind or woven in with trying to kind of find the strange within the ordinary. But I was frustrated with that medium and decided after art school that I actually didn't want to make art anymore at all. I was completely disillusioned and just went and made music. And while I was playing as a musician, I was touring and I was making costumes and sets. With a group of friends, it was all really chaotic and sort of DIY and scrappy and really exciting. And at the same time, I started to sort of draw and paint while I was making like flyers for gigs or sleeves for self-released albums. And that became like more and more serious. So I became a painter and a sculptor. And then I started to take that seriously as an art practice and went back into doing residencies and exhibitions. And at some point, that also became limited as a medium. And I realized suddenly that I was trying to juggle these strands of practice, like music making, object making, costume making, and it was just too much. I just couldn't hold it all, and none of them were really doing what I wanted them to do, so I just put them all together. So that's why I've got this slide here, because it's the first piece that I made when I came back to filmmaking. And I realized that using the methodology that I'd built up in that DIY time, I could actually like make everything that I envisaged happen, but on quite a small budget and on quite a small scale. So in this piece, I kind of hand-built, scaled-down sets and hand-painted everything and made all the costumes and wrote all the scripts and composed all the soundtracks and recorded it all in my bedroom. And it ended up in this kind of epic, episodic sort of 4-part film that I then like allowed me to move back into and find a medium that actually did do all the things that I felt in me. So the next slide is just kind of, where has it gone? Yes, that's just showing a sort of close-up of the set. And then more recently, I've started to expand this, I've put... sorry, this button is not doing its thing. Next slide. Oh, there we go. So yeah, so you can see I wanted to sort of compare this to the very early work because I like the idea of like an echo or a reiteration of an atmospheric that's kind of quoting a past work. So, but I've started to expand the set building side of my practice into kind of life-size installations so that you end up with a much more immersive and kind of physically affecting area in which to experience the work. And I work with spatial sound design, so the music and the songs kind of swoop around you and through you in the space, and I'm quite interested in this idea of like activating the viewer and allowing them to become like a participant in the work rather than just passively receiving film. So in this installation there are also kind of theatrical lights behind the sets, and the set is quite purposefully built to be very flimsy and sort of it just looks like it's made out of cardboard, but it's just more this like holder for the work, and the work screens at both ends of the room and sort of interrupts each other. So I guess I wanted to show this work as a way to talk about my ideas about composition as something that can encompass like the film, the space, the people within the space, the feelings in the body, and the sound and the image are symbiotic in their effects. So I'm just going to run through a few more images. Oh God, that went really quick. Can I go back? There we go. So the films have just continued to grow and become more and more ambitious in their content, and really they always try to take quite simple everyday things and to just pull them apart and find like layers within them that might initially seem quite straightforward but gradually become more and more complex. So this film is just actually about the idea of being friends. This film is a kind of mysterious woman that infinitely multiplies herself by trying to take her own photograph and ends up in this kind of trapped infinitely within a television. And then more recently I've started to do performative works where I'm sort of narrating and singing pieces within a video environment. So this is just like a really basic kind of open studios performance that I did, but I'm starting to get a little bit more ambitious with the set building and things for that, and the show that I'm working on at the moment includes quite a lot of live video performance works. So then I'm going to just play a little quite short excerpt from a film just to show you how the sort of music and movement and sound kind of all come together. It should play now, all being well. So I suppose I chose that section also to sort of touch on a little bit how I feel that like music and sound allows you to access areas that can't really be talked about or that can't be verbalized, and also as a condition for making the work, that somehow a process of sound and improvisation within composition allow you to reach areas in your unconscious and your subconscious that you wouldn't necessarily know how to bring out unless you let go of all the other attempts to sort of externalize or articulate. So that's my background.
Great, thanks. And next up is Susanna.
Hello. So I actually have a background in printmaking, and I tend to work more with images, and I sort of came to music as I grew up listening to a lot of reggae music. I'm from Glasgow, and there's a fantastic reggae scene there. And it was something that was kind of on my periphery for a long time. I think there was other questions to do with me, where I'm from, I suppose, and what it meant to be listening to reggae. in the Scottish context. And I wanted to use somehow images and sound together to kind of pull apart some of those questions. So I'm just going to take you through some images from a recent installation, which was in my degree show this year, and I sort of describe it as a physical, virtual archaeological site, which is constructed from images but overlaid with voices. So there's some sound which will come on as I go through.
The monotone.
Working with this jaw as a sort of externalization of language, and it seemed to me to be something that was quite directly communicating.
Yes, man, they want to keep idol. They want to keep idol. My fierce party grow. But them don't know.
And the teeth is actually an animated sequence. And as you start to hear the music, the teeth start to grow these kind of parasites, which start to, you'll see it later on, but they start to grow these kind of extrusions. And for me, it was like a kind of physical manifestation of language that was kind of inhabiting the mouth as an orifice and starting to corrupt the mouth. So another kind of motif in my work is spam. I'm quite interested in the language of spam, and I wanted to kind of make an environment where there was a sort of exorcism of spam, all the language that surrounds us and at times can kind of possess us. So I'll just go through these. And I had this phrase which was kind of reoccurring throughout the piece, Northeast Wisdom, which was kind of a piece of language that was about, well, my location, like being from the northeast of Scotland, but also wisdom as a kind of joke about wisdom teeth and embodied knowledge. And the northeast kind of functioning as the idea of that this kind of local language that you inhabit through spending time in a particular region, things which you acquire which are bodily. There's a couple, and this is a sort of close-up of the teeth which reoccur throughout my installations. So I have the externalization of language, I have the teeth, but I also have the voice. And I wanted to make it clear that those two things are quite separate. The teeth are kind of possessed by language and spam, but the voice is something which has, for me, the power to kind of exercise. It's kind of a way to kind of create an exorcism of all of this, of these things. And this is an extract of the video piece that was playing throughout the installation. Fungible commodities, revolving engines, open-air bars, products value weight, free enterprise, silica dried, a life underwater, swept and polished, cultivate an understanding of the conditions necessary for human flourishing, staying positive, rapid transition, enforced dependency on a post-colonial feudalism, with added tax-free opportunities, free trials and trans party, bring back the lover, So that piece, it's me reading out spam emails to a sort of reggae backing track. And coming back to reggae, for me this was something about slowing down, casting off language and trying to seek to join with the perceived other. And recently I've been working with a reggae musician in London, so my work has become much more about making music specifically. And that's been a little bit more about the power of the voice to lead you through an environment. This was a piece, it was commissioned for Artlicks Festival in London earlier this year. And the idea with this piece was that trying to overcome the limits of a certain technology. Yeah, that's me. I won't get too much into that one because it's a bit different, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And last is Rachel Mason.
Thank you. That was so cool. So this is a sculpture that I did when I was a student at Yale, and I guess I kind of sometimes include it here because it speaks to maybe everything that I've done going forward. I also have a circuitous path, as I guess we all do, to where we are right now. And I studied sculpture, and I also was very much concerned about politics back when I was a student. It was 2004. And I remember showing this piece on the day that the United States invaded Iraq, and it was the Bush administration. And I was just thinking about how little I knew about world politics. And I wanted to study and look at all the different people who were the heads of state of every single country. And I decided to do that. So I sculpted each and every prime minister or president in the entire United Nations, but I used this particular reference, the CIA's World Fact Book, to use all of these. So this piece is called Chiefs of State. It's kind of a large sculpture. And around that same time, I also did a kind of I guess it was a companion piece, but it was a musical companion. As often what happens with my work is I'll have a sculptural project which then has a musical companion, or somehow music is just developing at the same time. So this is actually a program that I wrote, a friend of mine who ended up going on to amazingly write some of the source code that started Twitter. I asked him to do this very simple project. He said he could easily do it in a half hour. Basically, I asked him if he were to take all of the national anthems from every single country in the world, and look at all of the common phrases, and basically look at what happens most repeated in all of the anthems. If just mathematically the computer could create an algorithm, as we know, like Twitter does this all the time. You know, what's the trending words? So he basically was able to create a national anthem with all the different languages translated into English, with the most commonly occurring words kind of flowing from the very first most common word. So I know it sounds convoluted, but it basically created this awesome and incredibly surreal and strange national anthem. And since I was a student, I presented this body of work to the dean of the music school, and he said, "Oh, this is really cool. I'll get a student to basically do the same thing, hybridize all of the different scores of national anthems." So this was the anthem, and I don't have time to play it, but I can look it up later. Anyways, and this was also another sculpture I made while I was a student called Kissing President Bush, and it's pretty obvious what that is. That's me kissing President Bush, and I basically couldn't get the image out of my head at that time that, somehow our country or myself had been seduced by this particular person. And ironic and strange as it is, here we are again in a totally different moment, but the United States has somehow been seduced again by another strange person. People think I'm strange. I think these other people are much more strange. Political leaders. So as going towards thinking about politics, I also embarked on another project that took many years, and it was I sculpted all of the different, for every year of my own life, I chose a war that I didn't know too much about, and I decided to look at who the players were at the heads of the states that were fighting. So they ranged from regional conflicts to large global wars. And then I wrote 2 albums of songs, and each song was in the mind of one of the leaders of one of these countries. And some of them actually led me to meet some of those leaders themselves. So I wrote to Manuel Noriega, who at the time was in jail here in Miami, and he wrote me back. So I had a little exchange with Noriega that led to the song on the second of the 2 albums. And I don't know what slides are next. Sorry. Oh yeah. So this is an exhibition. This is the U.S. War with Afghanistan, and that's Hamid Karzai, Mullah Omar, who was recently killed. That's me. See, that's the whole project, is that I inserted myself as like an ambassador to this war, and that's Obama on the end. And so every single year of my life, I basically made a fictional version of myself as an ambassador, as like a little collectible item. So, and then I would do these live performances where I would enact the different people. So this is the president of Burkina Faso, and I was performing a song that actually some other musicians collaborated with me to write some of the lyrics, because I would tell friends of mine that I was doing this project. So Jennifer Harema of the band Royal Trucks actually wrote the lyrics to this song about the president of Burkina Faso, which is so random and interesting. And then this is another just side tangential project. Often I, put myself in the work. I've long had an obsession and interest in the Habsburg royal family, and I just found them in a strange way to kind of present to, maybe I'm very American, and in my focus, I become very aware of that, and I think there's actually a lot we can learn just from even symbolically looking at some of the tragedies of the European royal system, specifically the Spanish Habsburg rulers, who eventually died off at the moment of Carlos II, at least that particular line, because of so much inbreeding. And yet they were portrayed by the greatest artists of their time, Velázquez, Dürer, and, this is Carlos II. And I wrote a song about him, and actually I always thought it would be great to write an opera about him. Haven't yet done that, but so this is me enacting Carlos II next to a sculpture I made of Carlos II. And actually, I don't know if I have a better image of this project. Oh, okay, there. This kind of relates to your interest in teeth. I've also always been interested in teeth, and I think there's this sort of central thing. Actually, back when I was a student at UCLA, I interviewed the dean of the School of Dentistry, and I remember him telling me that the mouth is the window to the body, like it's the actual window into which you see what's happening in the body, whatever's going on in the mouth. And I only thought about that recently because I've been doing some work at UCLA in Los Angeles, and the Habsburgs had this extreme underbite. And even to this day, any orthopedic or orthodontic or dentist will call an underbite a Habsburg jaw if you ask them. So I thought it was interesting, this kind of small window into a very, obviously destructive practice of inbreeding, which ultimately destroyed the entire political system, is witnessed through the teeth. So I created my own little portrait gallery with people that I knew, and I gave everybody a Habsburg jaw. It's kind of my project. And then this is another piece that I did in Los Angeles. it was a gallery exhibition after I was on the presidential campaign trail when Obama was running. And I met all the different candidates, including Obama himself. And I drew lots of portraits of them. And it was actually, funny enough, an assignment for Playboy magazine to draw the John Edwards campaign. And of course, he went down in flames, as we all know. John Edwards had a very scandalous end to his political career. But I was an illustrator for this story. And I ended up with all these cool drawings and meeting all the candidates. And I realized, wow, politicians, when they're campaigning, are so dramatic. It's like they don't make a performer look even remotely dramatic. They're so huge. And so all these gesture drawings were what led to this project. And I made podiums with my hands doing the gestures. So this is some of the drawings that I did on the campaign trail. I think that was Bill Richardson. And then this is sort of where I've moved in as of late, although I started making large paper mache sculptures. This is something I did at a residency, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. And I started just making these paper mache forms, and I kind of went very far away from having strict conceptual underpinning to everything, and remembered my deep love of operatic strangeness and science fiction.
I gotta cut you short,
Yep.
Rachel.
Okay, that's good.
So you can get to your Nada performance.
Oh, thank you.
By the way, that's why we have to be
Yeah.
on time, because Rachel is giving a performance at Nada. But I just wanted to have time for a couple of questions among ourselves, and then, of course, open up to the audience. And the first one that I want to start with, and I want to start with Kathryn, is that here we have a combination of working artists, and also Kathryn, who's somebody who is an advocate for artists. And I think that it seems that everyone here is interested in the collaborative and community-oriented aspects of the artistic vision. And I think it'd be good to talk for a little bit about the power of community engagement, about outreach, and how the arts through music can affect some sort of positive social change.
Well, I think I think certainly the arts through music and the collaborative component of all of your works is really what drew me, to your work and to bringing you to the residency. I think in a time like now, this working together and working to help build community and expand our audiences and to cross-pollinate patrons is very important. And there's so much we can what's the word I'm looking for? That we can bring about through the arts, right? The arts brings about dialogue. It opens up the opportunity to talk and to problem solve in a way that I don't know anything else does. And so when you bring together various art forms like art and music, or we were talking about some collaborations that I'm looking into with visual arts and chefs and scientists, it just broadens the world and brings us all to a place where we can communicate with a common ground that I think is so important now. I think I think I think that's it. I think it's really about coming to a common ground and communicating in a way that lifts us all up. When people talk about politics, in such a negative way, listen, we are where we are. So we need to work together to pick everyone up and to change we have the power to make a difference. If we can sit back and do nothing, or we can act. And I think that's what we need to do in this, music inspires people, art inspires people. That's what we need to focus on going forward, is how do we inspire one another? How do we lift each other up? How do we advance a dialogue? How do we make a difference? So, and how do we do that in our communities? mine in particular in Miami, but how do we do that globally? I mean, I think that's part of what the Residency does, is by bringing artists in from all over the world and starting that dialogue, then everyone disperses and goes back to their countries, to their cities, and they take with them that experience and those exchanges and plant those seeds, back where they came from.
I mean, I think that's maybe also quite apt to the conversation we're having today about the artist as composer, something about collaboration just internally within one person, and the way that an image making and object making practice, combined with a music practice, each thing sort of pulls each other in different directions and forces you into unfamiliar territory. So in a sense, that's a collaborative process within yourself. But also, in the community sort of aspect, what I've found really special about the project that we've done here with David is kind of going to the Soundscape Park and just seeing how different people are kind of reacting and participating in the work, because there's something about music and sound that allows people from such a varied cross-section of life, but also different, there were tiny toddlers dancing to some of the songs, and who knows how that will colour their subconscious as they're growing up, and people who don't necessarily speak the same language as the lyrics that were sung or spoken in the pieces, but something about the feeling and the atmospheric and the emotion of music allows that to sort of cross boundaries between different groups, and yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you were talking about, that feeling, it's also about that physical feeling, that we really didn't talk about in your individual presentations, but I think that's a lot of it, is that it's not about, it's like children playing on the playground, right? They don't have to speak the same language, their language is play, and music is a language that crosses all boundaries, and it's not always about the lyrics. It's often about the sound and the feeling. It's involving another sense, not just the visual, not just the sound, but the physical.
If I might make a suggestion to complicate this a little bit, I think that the idea of music as universal is certainly an important one, but I also wonder how we can be aware of lines of difference, specifically with regard to music. I mean, I'm thinking about your interest in the ethnographic, for instance, in that, yes, there is this universal aspect to language and music, but there still remains important lines of difference that have to be contended with. So I wonder how we might think through that.
I think I'm just thinking about the first time I listened to reggae. I think it was Sister Nancy. This track I heard in Glasgow, and I remember just feeling that I could, because it's quite difficult to approach something and inhabit it. It's not necessarily in my background, but I saw it more as a mode of relation, of relating to others, rather than being about filiation, about I've got my ancestry in Scotland, or I'm really Scottish or something. I mean, I think everyone's from everywhere, really. So it's kind of using the music as a kind of conduit to kind of create spaces for people to come to enter in, and not feeling anxious about that's somebody else's culture. It ends at the boundaries at which it reverberates to. I mean, being in Soundscape Park as well, what was really interesting was that I felt that there was a sort of group subjectivity that was sort of being generated in the listening experience. I think I got this. Yeah, when you look around, people are really they are really listening, and it stops being about just a cult of individualism. It stops being about just I'm rushing about the city, and then here's a space where it's okay to kind of lie on somebody a bit. Or
And I like also hearing you talk about the first time you heard reggae and thinking about sound as something that can also like be a surprise and a sort of transformative force, that maybe it would pull, oftentimes anyway, something that you don't expect or that you're slightly that seems slightly strange or as it's like the ability to travel through learning to appreciate and understand different forms of music and that kind of excitement and that energy that comes from, and maybe the process of making strange is something that's quite apt for Rachel's practice, like in terms of, it's interesting to me to see like a kind of cross-section through like a lot of your past projects and this kind of approaching, I guess, imagery that we've been fed in a way that we're very used to through the media, but then your process of kind of making strange and then taking a different perspective on through sound and music, maybe.
Yeah, well, actually, one thing that's a big part of my actual practice is songwriting, and it's a very specific discipline in a strange way. I actually probably divide up my own practice into, I'll be working on a video or making a performance, and I'll literally get an idea for a song, or I've had it where I have to pull over and write down some lyrics, or songs are just something that is really important to my work, and I craft songs and collaborate with lots of people. But I guess this picture here is from a rock opera that I created, and I sing with it. But in terms of music and its intersection with art, I think a lot of artists follow the thing that just drives them. It's like, you have to do it. And that's, I used to have people say, like, why are you making music if you're, an artist? And for me, it's like, I literally can't not do that. And so finally, I was like, all right, well, if I can't not do this thing, I'm going to have to bring it in. And I love doing it, and I love performing. And just merging those worlds makes so much sense to me. Now I can't imagine keeping them separate.
May I ask a question? Maybe this is a very straightforward question, but I find these probably not. The music that you listen to, the music that inspires you, is it the same music that you include in your art, or is it different? Yeah.
A bit of both. I don't know. I used to think more about sampling, and what it means, like in terms of the sort of being inhabited by language, being kind of possessed by music almost, and sampling music is like a kind of parasiting of that space. And then I think I wanted to just go beyond that, I think, and just start making my own stuff, but I'm still using loops and feedback and echoes, but kind of find a way that the voice could actually lead the music making rather than borrowing from other sources.
Yeah, I mean, I find I kind of am a total amateur at everything that I play, and I guess I have a sort of ADHD in musicianship, in that as soon as I sort of feel I understand an instrument adequately, I sort of want to skip to another one to be in that unknowing kind of head where I can surprise myself. And I do definitely have like really strong musical influences, but I somehow see it as really separate to the music that I produce within my art practice. Mm-hmm. But I think that occasionally when there is an influence, it's interesting how like my amateurism is somehow quite productive, in that if I do try to mimic like a rhythm or a or sort of some, like I got really influenced by polyphonic harmony and certain kind of folk song traditions and tribal song traditions, but because I don't have like a sort of music theoretical knowledge of how that might be produced, that my way of like kind of just layering up my voice and doing what I felt kind of produced something completely different and separate. Right. So even though that was something that coloured it, like the atmospheric that emerged was something kind of wonky and in a way like more of my own world. So, but I think I am just really interested in that idea of like the sort of creative mulch, like having this thing inside you that you're feeding with the sort of energy and influence of other people's work, and then just letting it sit and ferment and get really muddled in amongst all your own experiences before somehow misremembering and slightly, re-articulating.
Now, so we have time for Q&A. Let's ask Rachel this question at her performance at NADA, because I think it's a good one. But I wanted to see if we had any questions from our guests. Yes.
I'm just curious to the methods of how you sell the music as art. If you use a kind of a visual, like just art kind of similar to the fair and that kind of framework to sell your music, or is it kind of like iTunes and just distributed to the masses and such, or maybe even potentially see an album sell on Christie's or something, or Sotheby's, which I think would be really interesting. Yeah.
Maybe I can answer that because I just released an album, and I love that question because it's actually, I think we're at the heart of a market-driven convention of sorts. We're trying to figure out how to sell art and how do you sell music. I actually think, what I do myself is I totally make it available. And my music can be licensed, and that's great. A great way for me to make money, actually, is to have a song be featured in a commercial or whatever, a film. But and I care about the craft of songs and try and aim to make songs that can exist fully in the world of pop music. And I perform a lot in a music environment with people that are just focused on music. But to bring it into art, often it's actually the connection to a live performance or a video, and I get paid to perform at institutions, and the actual money that will come from the music tends to be more for me through a performance in an institutional way. I don't package it, but that's a really fascinating idea to craft a song that you could sell as art. Curious how it's a cool idea.
I feel that I wouldn't like it if I just made it to sell, in the sense that I think necessarily when you make something, an artwork, it does kind of frame it, packages it. It's something, it has an exchange value. So it always seems it's like an inherent contradiction, I suppose, for all artists. You're always kind of trying to make something which speaks to people, and it's not necessarily about its monetary value, yet it's centering an art market. I do other things for money, I work as a PA, I do, and then I wouldn't necessarily make it with selling at its heart. And I think it is an inherent kind of struggle with that, but I would hope that I hope that artists would get paid more for performing and for taken seriously as kind of cultural workers, as opposed to actually selling the work as an artifact. I think it would render it too much as a static thing.
I guess I haven't really thought about it in economic or market terms, but I got really excited recently because I'm making an audio publication for a solo show that I'm doing next year, and the people that I'm working with were just asking me how we would have it physically, and because I make these kind of props within my work, I kind of had this idea of making a sculptural USB that would be this kind of inexplicable, ambiguous object that I like the idea of a future archaeology of something being found that has this attachment, and it's somehow a time capsule of this weird audio nonsense that and obviously that's a very romanticized kind of sci-fi vision of, but it is interesting to think how a sound can be situated within an object and how that can become something that's unique and just an oddity that because I think it's important for music and sound to be disseminated and to be egalitarian in its people being able to access it with, but then if people do feel like this strong ownership of the music and they want to own something that is a kind of holder for that and that also represents a segment of the world that it's come from, that seems to me like quite a nice and touching sort of thing. So I'm actually starting to edition Soundworks on sculptural USBs, but it's a bit of a novelty in a way, but it appeals to me in a kind of playful sense of having a thing.
Anyone else? Yes. Oh, thank you.
Have any of you ever made your own instruments? Have any of you ever made your own instruments? To me, that seems like sort of maybe the connection between like object making and sound.
Making your own, yeah. I had a band that we all made all the instruments. It's something that I'm really excited about. I was at the time like really influenced by Harry Partch, who had a kind of sculptural instrument making practice, and he was a kind of a bum that rode on the railways, but he also had this like really ambitious and kind of dramatic, like mythological. Yes, it was really intense. You should look up his work; it's amazing. But my instruments that I made were just like small and a bit rubbish, but it did open up really exciting potential for the sound, and I still continue to sample, like most of the sounds in my music are samples from like either just playing with like found objects or like sampling railings and vehicles and then like playing with them on a MIDI keyboard. So yeah, it's something I'm really interested in. I don't know where I'm pointing. I'm just opening it up to others.
I've modified instruments that I've performed. I don't think I've invented like a whole new instrument, but I work with people that have, and it's really cool.
Are you all formally? I've had the opportunity to get to know Molly a bit better than Rachel and Susanna, but Molly is actually self-taught, and I proudly say she's self-taught herself: piano, guitar, flute, percussion. Just everything.
Badly.
Are you
productively badly?
But were you all formally trained in music? I know that you actually went to school for the visual arts. But is music, you came from a family of musicians, and Rachel, a family of business people. But were you all formally trained in music? I know you were, but I think it's interesting because you're all different from that perspective.
My family actually are all folk musicians. They play Scottish folk music, which is obviously quite different from reggae, but it's quite interesting because when you're young, you sort of absorb these things, and in my mind it started to merge with my early influences, and this kind of odd kind of mixture of folk and reggae and dub and spoken word started to kind of flow for me. So I think it's kind of like your brain is just the conduit for that. Like you just absorb that. And I did actually also train as a pianist for a long time. And I used to teach piano as well. Yeah.
And Rachel, what about you?
I took rudimentary piano lessons as a kid, and my family couldn't be further from musicians or artists. I'm absolutely the black sheep. But no, I did study piano a little bit, and then I remember I had an elementary school teacher that thought I had perfect pitch, and that was kind of enough for me to be like, cool, I can sing. And then the School of Rock and Roll taught me everything else, if ever I needed to be a drummer or a guitarist or a bassist for bands that I played in. I would grab the instrument, figure it out, and play, and that's how I learned pretty much all the other additional instruments that I play.
I think we have time for one more, right? Yes.
Hi. As a student, I was wondering, how much does research versus feeling factor in your work?
Research versus feeling. It's kind of interesting that you pose it as a dichotomy. I'll just answer myself because I find that research inspires so much feeling that sometimes that's entirely where everything comes from. I'll be researching something like this film that this image is from. It's I researched this very strange coincidence of two men that died on the same day, and it took me down this path of making a film and writing over 20 songs, and it was just such a moving thing to realize two men with the exact same name had this like strange death, like on the same front page. You know, sometimes research is just so incredibly interesting and exciting, and I think that can be filled with emotion for me personally.
It's interesting the way you pose it, right? Because I think some people think of research as being dry. If you know, I think research from in the more business world or something, the world outside of art. I won't say the business world. I'll just say the world outside of art tends to be this. You think of a researcher as this very dry, like person sitting behind a computer or behind a desk, and it, whereas the first thing you talk about is the emotion that comes from the research, and I think that's absolutely true. And everything that I've learned through the artists that have come through the residency is that it is anything but dry. It informs your entire practice.
I mean, I think that what we call research as what part of an arts practice is just like a human inclination or a pull towards, it's quite a visceral and kind of instinctive thing. And perhaps within art education, there's an encouragement to sort of dress it up as something that's kind of a plausible intellectual conceit, but actually like that what research allows is for a non-linear and non-binary kind of approach to, and I would say that often feeling is research in terms of, we had a nice talk earlier about the role of vocalization as a kind of like a summoning process, and I liked what you said about exorcism as well, of like letting just like a really basic primal thing of the vibration of a voice in your body pull something out of you so that it's external and you can examine it and react to it and be in this like contact with the outside world, and I think that often the things that I'm most drawn to making work about are stuff that I find just absolutely inexplicable, and it's like a felt reaction to something that is mysterious and enigmatic in the world around me, and that obviously then you do start to research around that topic, but it usually comes from like a visceral pull.
Yeah, I think that like a push and pull between, the sort of quite a closed world of academia, but there's I think I know in that piece that I was kind of looking to use quite lo-fi effects within a sort of trying to offset that alongside some sort of digital, quite sophisticated digital imaging, and through the kind of juxtaposition, there's you're kind of in the space of the mind. There's a sort of interiorized idea of what's going on, and I think also just by making it interactive, like it's generated by people coming in there and actually moving the work around and interacting in the listening experience and with the audio. It's at the end of it, that's the best that you can hope for. I think you can aspire to the status of maybe what music can do within arts.
Well, unfortunately, we have to stop, but I'd like to end in solidarity by thanking my fellow panelists, Art Basel, and all of you for being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.